So we are now officially launching this event. Excellencies, dear colleagues, welcome to this event organized by the Global Framework on Chemicals Secretariat with the support of the Geneva Environment Network. Exactly 2 years ago, many of us were in Bonn, Germany, attending the last hours of the closing plenary of the 5th International Conference on Chemicals Management, where the Global Framework on Chemicals for a Planet Free of Harm from Chemicals and Waste was adopted. It is important to recall that the Global Framework on Chemicals complements the global deals that set agreed goals and targets to tackle the triple environmental planetary crisis that humanity currently faces, as we have the Paris Agreement for Climate Change, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework for Nature, Land, and Biodiversity Loss, and now the Global Framework on Chemicals for Pollution and Waste. The Global Framework on Chemicals Fund that we are discussing this morning was launched alongside the framework at the same conference to support countries in implementing this international agreement. The fund is launching this week its second call for applications, and this is what is bringing us together this morning. We are joined today by the head of the Secretariat of the Framework and her team to inform applicants about the Global Framework of Chemicals Fund, as well as important elements for applying for the second call for funding. We'll be sharing during this session a series of documents and links that will help you understand better the process. Before we begin, let me remind you that the documents presented, the summary, as well as the video of the event will be made as usual available on the webpage of the event. The link is being shared in the chat. And throughout the event, you can raise your questions by using the Q&A tool. We will use these to feed the discussion during the Q&A session. I also want to add that the transcript is available in over 100 languages, as indicated in the slides that you have seen here. Those who are more comfortable in English and Spanish can also write their questions in these two languages. N'hésitez pas a écrire vos questions en français. Pueden escribir sus preguntas en español. We only have a capacity around this table to accommodate these three UN languages. And to formally welcome you and open this event, I'm delighted to give the floor to the head of the Global Framework on Chemical Secretariat, Ms. Kay Williams. Kay, over to you.
Thank you very much, Diana. And thank you to the Gen for helping us organize this webinar this morning. So in the next slide, as was said, it is actually 2 years ago where we adopted the Global Framework on Chemicals. So next slide, please. Oh, sorry. And in fact, what did we adopt? In fact, we adopted something that was much stronger, more ambitious than the previous framework that we had. We have 5 strategic objectives, 28 targets, but we've retained the multi-sectoral, multi-stakeholder nature of the framework. Very importantly, at the high-level segment, we had ministers and heads of delegations that agreed that the urgency of the problem needed more collaborative and direct action. And we have that political commitment, which is very important when we're trying to do work together. And then the third strand that we adopted 2 years ago was the fund, the Global Framework on Chemicals Fund, where we had an initial contribution from the German government, and we now have around $29 million in that fund. And we hope very much today that we'll be able to support many more projects in those countries that are struggling to make sure that we have safe and sustainable management of chemicals. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry. So collaboration is absolutely key in the framework. So the framework organizes partnerships between governments, NGOs, and civil society. That has been the strength of the framework. We can all sit around the table and have recognize our voices. There's no priority for countries in particular, but that also means we have this shared responsibility and can put together joint initiatives. At this stage, the framework, I think, is very much about implementation. We've had with the SciCam a very good policy framework. It was innovative for its time. The focus in many ways is to adopt some of the new technologies, to harness the innovation of sustainable chemistry so that we can move forward to make sure that we don't have these harmful releases to the environment that impact our human health, biodiversity, and the wider environment. So collaboration enables us to exchange knowledge, provide collective action, but it also makes us stronger in our unified efforts to meet the vision of the framework. So as a reminder, what are the objectives of the framework? We have 5 of them. The first one is a very important strategic objective where I think a lot of work and emphasis is going into making sure we have robust legal frameworks, institutional mechanisms, because without that, it's very difficult for not only trade to take place, but also for the controls and checks for what is in some places a very difficult issue to regulate. We also know that data is incredibly important, and there is a lot of data out there, but it's about how this information can be accessed, how it can be used, and how we can reuse information and assessments that have been developed and invested in globally, so that we're not all starting from a blank piece of paper. We know that the information about certain harmful chemicals is already present. I think we need to be better at being able to share that and use it in different circumstances. There's a lot of work done under the previous framework on issues of concern. They are still important, and work will be going, decisions will be made at the international conference on potentially any new issues of concern, but also what happens with the old ones that were under the previous SciCam and how they should be prioritized and addressed. And certainly, strategic objective D is speaking to very much a new audience. We need to reach out to talk to different types of stakeholders, particularly in the finance sector and investors, but also along the supply chain, where we're talking to those people that are using the chemicals manufactured by the often global multinationals, and that are using, certainly in their supply chain, understanding what is being used to develop certain products. Chemical footprinting is something that's definitely come up as being a key and important part of understanding and providing data along the supply chain of the chemicals that are being used. And then finally, I think strategic objective E is much about collaboration and how we interface with the different sectors such as health, agriculture, labor, very important sectors, but also the other environmental issues that we face, including climate change and biodiversity loss. So where are we in terms of our timeline and calendar? We had last year around this time the first call for applications, project applications, and we did have a lot of interest. I think it was very much a pilot round in a way, because the executive board was trying to discover the priorities that it would like to set. There have been changes made for this second round, so do listen carefully about the approach that's been taken on board, because due to feedback from participants that put forward proposals. And as you can see, after this round, we are working very closely towards the first international conference in November 2026, where we hope we will be able to showcase some of the projects that will be underway under the fund. And just touching on a little bit about the open-ended working group, a number of us met in Punta del Este, Uruguay, for the first meeting of the Global Framework on Chemicals, where about 380 participants attended in person, including many representatives from youth industry, NGOs, and civil society. There were in-person and virtual sessions, and a number of masterclasses and cross-cutting side events. We also, for Strategic Objective D, did have a multi-stakeholder day featuring sector-specific sessions in electronics, textiles, healthcare, and finance itself. We had two excellent co-chairs that supported us and led us through the week in Punta del Este. And we had a lot of focus on implementation programs, which are one of the key vehicles for delivering action on the ground and for collaboration. And we're going to hear a little bit more about that, I think, later on. Health, textiles, electronics, building construction, again, are some of the themes that are coming through in terms of implementation programs. And there is definitely good progress being made in all of these areas in terms of at least the work plans, the terms of reference, and we hope to see much progress by the international conference. Work has also been done on gender, and there's a draft action plan, which is near conclusion. And the focus on capacity building, but particularly the role of focal points, is very important. And the Secretariat has been doing a lot of work to understand how we can engage focal points, not only from the environment, but for labour and the health sectors, and also to provide much more support and training, especially for new focal points. So I think watch this space in terms of any induction programs and any refreshing of focal points for the framework. The Global Alliance on Highly Hazardous Pesticides held a meeting and a discussion, and will hopefully be and has been encouraging members, and I think it will hopefully be getting together soon. And measurability and indicators, we did hear a lot from the group about how to take the way forward. And please do, if you're interested in this area, please do engage with the special ad hoc open-ended working group on measurability and indicators, which is going at pace with some more dedicated work with experts. And I think it's very important that we take that measurability aspect really importantly, so that we can assess the progress of the actions as we move forward. And then finally, we're working towards the international conference in next year in November. So what do we have? The means for implementation for the framework. National implementation, I've mentioned the importance of networks, focal points, working together at the national level. It's a difficult job to be a focal point and to be an effective focal point. And I think many governments in particular underestimate the amount of time that it can take, or it should be taking, to do that role effectively. So we are going to again be supporting and helping governments to achieve the tasks that will enable, I think, more progress to be made on the ground. The IOMC organizations have done a lot of work on implementation programs, looking at legislation and capacities with some global workshops and embedding sustainable chemicals management into decision-making processes. We have seen a number of partnerships being set up, and there really are, that is the strength of this framework, and that is really a true reality at the moment. So that's excellent progress is being made in that area. And again, as I've mentioned, measurability. So what a call to action. We still have a long way to go. We're making progress. Sometimes it's slow, sometimes it can happen a little bit more quickly. The fund is here to help you catalyze that action, to be able to take that extra step, to align national policies and budgets with the framework and the targets and the goals that we would like to achieve by 2030 and 2035. We know that we're encouraging that activity at a regional and a global level can really enhance the impact of what's happening, and that where we can share knowledge and best practice, that does allow, I think, development and improvement to happen at a quicker pace. So we encourage you to apply for funding and collaborate on projects that do help strengthen that chemical safety. And I think together we will achieve our vision of a planet free of harm from chemicals and waste. Thank you.
We will now move to Eduarda Calero Petit. Eduardo, over to you.
Thank you, Diana, and thank you again for hosting this webinar that will allow us to speak about the Global Framework on Chemicals Fund. My name is Eduardo Caldera Petit, and I am the coordinator of the GFC Fund at the GFC Secretariat. And on this presentation, we're going to learn about what the fund is about, how it is governed, but more importantly, what are the priorities of the fund and how to apply in this new round. The fund, and I want to come back to how Kay ended her presentation, the fund is created to support the vision of the framework, which is a planet free of harm from chemicals and waste with practical actions. So this fund is allowing countries to take these steps with this support, financial resources to enable them to do so. And as I was mentioned in the introduction, the fund was created as part of the Global Framework on Chemicals and its financial arrangements in September 2023. It is a time-limited fund and is administered by UNEP. It's important also to note that the fund exists to complement larger financial mechanisms, such as the GEF, and it aims at filling those critical gaps by providing support to create enabling conditions in countries, pilot projects, and reaching other stakeholders and actors that bigger mechanisms don't always reach. The fund objective is to directly provide support to developing countries in the implementation of the framework and its 5 strategic objectives and the 28 targets. Following our very successful first round, where we had over 100 applications from 77 countries, we are today happy to launch the round 2 for funding. And for this cycle, we have refined the guidance based on the lessons learned from round 2. But what I would like to highlight right now is that the biggest change that we have made in the guidance and application process is that we have now 2 steps application process. And first, we invite interested applicants to develop concept notes. These are lighter, shorter documents that will allow you to set your idea clearly and impactful. And then on a second stage, those successful concept notes will then be invited to submit a full application form. And that means that the applicants can invest their time more efficiently. And the timeline is the launch today, 30th of September, and then the concept notes will be open for submission until the 15th of December this year. Following a review of those concept notes and project ideas, the successful applicants will be invited to develop their full-fledged project proposal in spring of 2026, and the final funding decisions by the executive board will be communicated later in 2026. And this 2-stage process will help ensure that high-quality proposals are built progressively and contain feedback from the board as they move on to a full application, and that will make the application cycle smoother and more transparent for everyone. This is a slide that shows the different stages and steps in this application process, and I won't go into detail on this because the presentation will be available after this webinar. But I would like just to repeat here the key dates so that we are all with the same understanding. We're launching today, 30th of September 2025, and the concept notes period will go through today and the 15th of December 2025. And then once these concept notes have been appraised by the executive board, successful applicants will be invited to submit their full applications in the spring of 2026. What does this mean for you with this application process? This means that you have now the opportunity to submit a concept note now, a concept note that is impactful, a concept note that provides enough information to assess your project feasibility, but also the project innovative idea, the project implementation approach to the framework. And then if you are shortlisted, you will be then receiving some feedback from the board and be guided to develop a full application in spring 2026. It is important also to note that a shortlisted concept note does not guarantee a successful application, meaning that even though some concept notes will be shortlisted and invited to develop a full application form, that doesn't necessarily mean that that project will be approved. So efforts will need to be put into the concept note, but also into the application, and then final decisions will be taken by the board following that submission process. Then who can apply? And this is coming from the terms of reference of the fund that were adopted when the framework was established. So they haven't, these criteria of application haven't changed from the last round, but I would like to repeat them for clarity and transparency. So governments from developing countries can apply for funding, and the fund, as stated in the terms of reference, takes particularly importance on the needs of least developed countries, small island development states, and also countries with economies in transition can submit applications for funding. Also, on an exceptional basis, civil society networks are also eligible to apply for funding, but it's important that they do have the host country endorsement so that the application is fully eligible for consideration. Also, we encourage that applications are multi-sectoral as much as possible, including the environment sector, the health and labor, agriculture, industry, academia, and workers. So the more that the project can demonstrate how it is making sure that these interlinkages are being considered as the project is implemented, the more likelihood that the project will be prioritized. And we will be learning a little bit more about how to consider that those interlinkages with other sectors, such as labor and health. Now, coming to the financial support that can be provided, it goes as the previous round for projects between $300,000 US to $800,000 US. That doesn't mean that all projects need to submit an application with a higher amount. Actually, the board looks at the cost, does a cost-benefit analysis and takes into consideration how much of the budget is being requested, so that to ensure that the use of the fund is going to the most efficient projects. The projects will run for up to 3 years, so that's the maximum timeline that the project proposals could be put forward. But we're open and actually highly encourage project proposals that have a shorter project time, so that we can deliver as soon as possible on the different targets of the framework before 2030. Also, there is a co-financing requirement, as it was all in the previous round. Each project should try to achieve 25% of co-financing, depending on the amount that has been requested. But it's important also to note here that that co-financing could include in-kind contributions. So it doesn't need to be necessarily a cash allocation, but it can be in-kind contributions such as staff time, accommodation, office space, and operating costs. Let's move on now into the strategic priorities of the fund. So, of course, the fund is to respond to the different objectives and targets of the framework. But it's important here to understand that the main activities to be supported by the fund, as considered by the executive board, are those projects that are aiming at strengthening the institutional capacities in countries so that the chemicals and waste management is well implemented from the beginning, and that governments have the capacity to monitor and to enforce chemical safety in countries. And that includes the development of laws and legislation, also the establishment of coordination bodies in the countries, ensure that there are sufficient compliance and enforcement mechanisms, etc. But also targets such as data and transparency, so projects that could look into building more data and transparency availability, such as creating inventories, IT systems for chemical data, risk assessments, and prioritization are also a priority for the fund. And then projects that look into the safer product design and substitution of harmful chemicals. In particular, those projects that can demonstrate that are moving markets towards safer alternative. And here a particular emphasis is given to the work with high impact sectors, such as the electronics, textiles, agriculture, and construction, encouraging approaches in the projects that could demonstrate that they could reduce pollution while also protecting the health, labor, and the environment. And then also the fund is looking into priority those projects that could demonstrate that are building different partnerships with different stakeholders from the health and labor, but also projects that are supportive of mobilization of domestic financing for chemicals and waste management and for mainstreaming of chemicals and waste management into national development plans. So now let's look at what a strong application could look like. First, it is important that project applications are well conceptualized and structured, that there is a clear problem analysis, a baseline assessment, outcomes, indicators, and also a credible work plan and log frame that would demonstrate that the project has been well conceived and have the feasibility and likelihood of being successfully implemented. Then it is important also that there's national ownership of that project initiative. So that means that, or one means that the board has to measure that is that there is an alignment with the national development plans and with the priorities of the country where the application is coming from. But also important that the project has a realistic timeline and that is not overcommitting, that there are clear roles of the different stakeholders and project partners that will be involved in the implementation, and that there is a robust risk management plan embedded into the project. Then another aspect that has been emphasized in the revised guidance following the executive board discussions on the first round is that the projects should demonstrate long-term sustainability. And that means that there is an institutionalization of the results of the project to ensure that the project results will be maintained after the project closure. And also here, another aspect that helped the board to measure the sustainability is how these activities of the project, for instance, tools, IT systems, etc., could be replicated in other countries as well. Then the provision of co-financing is one of the minimum criteria, at least 25%. And again, that might include also in-kind contribution. And also very important, which is something that also is a lesson learned from the previous round, is that the board is looking very carefully at avoiding any duplication with projects or programs that have been already funded under other bilateral or multilateral funding mechanisms. Then, if the project complies with all these minimum criteria, there are also some prioritization criteria that the board is looking for. Here, that the project is responding to a clear national priority and that is mainstreaming activities into sector plans. Also, with projects that are of regional or transboundary relevance, of course, are also prioritized because with the same amount of money, the impact is larger. So this is one of the prioritization criteria that the board will apply when selecting the projects, and also the potential for replication, a successful activity that, if supported by the fund, could demonstrate that it could be replicable in other countries or regions. Also, projects that are catalyzing sustainable finance and partnerships that will endure beyond the GFC fund grant. And this is in support, again, of the sustainable domestic finance that is important that countries look at to sustain chemicals and waste management in the long term. Then projects that have cross-cutting benefits for health, labor, and environment. And this is just a reflection as well of the multi-sectoral nature of our framework. And for those projects that demonstrate that they could provide a co-financing greater than the recommended 25% of the project costs, or that show that how the project could benefit other regions or other countries by knowledge sharing, by capacity building or transfer of tools and results, of course, will be also be prioritized. Now, this is an important slide and is also part of the revisions that we have made on the guidance document. We have listed those projects that, though could be eligible, will not be prioritized by the board. And the reason is because we have a limited amount of funding, and the board is looking at directing this funding to those projects that will have the biggest impact on chemicals and waste management towards the targets that need to be achieved by 2030 and 2035. So projects that, even though could be eligible, but fall primarily under the mandate of other established funding mechanisms, such as the JEF, the special program, or the specific international program under Minamata, are not going to be prioritized. If your project idea is a better fit elsewhere, we recommend and encourage you to please look into other financial mechanisms. So please check the alignment of your project idea with the fund before putting on your application. Also, those projects that are duplicating past efforts without a clear added value are not to be prioritized. If you are replicating an earlier project that had been funded by another financial mechanism, show what's new, show where is the innovation, where is the scaling up of that project, or how lessons learned from another similar initiative have been applied to this new project idea. Otherwise, that project will not be prioritized. Then also projects that look strictly onto research or studies only proposals, like research, baseline, and assessment without a credible path on implementation and measurable impact, will not be prioritized. Of course, this is a public fund, so direct investments in commercial and for-profit ventures is something that is not going to be prioritized. The fund is not an investment vehicle. We focus on public interest outcomes and enabling conditions. Then also projects that are primarily for infrastructure or equipment purchases are not going to be prioritized. Proposals need capacity, policy, and uptake components to be competitive. If the projects are too narrow on scopes with limited impact, for instance, municipal projects or projects that are focusing in a very, very specific topic and cannot show that those results would have a greater impact, then those projects are not going to be prioritized. And coming back to the sustainability, the board is making an emphasis that projects that do not have a clear exit strategy, meaning a clear approach on how the project is going to be handed over to once the project is reaching to a closure, and how to ensure that all the necessary steps and mechanisms are being put together to ensure sustainability, then the project will not be prioritized. So I think that's something to consider when you are applying, and this is very well explained as well in the new guidance for funding. Now, just as a reminder, who makes the decisions on project funding? It's important to, again, recall you that the Executive Board includes 2 representatives from each one of the UN regions, and also all donors or contributors to the fund. And they are the ones that make final funding decisions and also the priorities of the fund. The Secretariat, on the other hand, supports the work of the Executive Board by screening the applications for completeness, eligibility, and facilitates the appraisal process for the Executive Board. Also, it's important to note that there is a transparent criteria and assessment framework, and all eligible applications are equally assessed by the board in a very transparent manner. And these decisions are recorded and reported to the International Conference. This is just as a quick snapshot on the first round. I won't delve too much in here, just to say that of the total 105 applications that we received, there were only 80 eligible applications. So these 80 applications were the ones that went through the full appraisal by the Executive Board. And interesting also here, data is that 56% of the project applications were submitted by government entities and 44% by non-government entities. And then you have the split of the regions. Mainly applications in majority were submitted by the African region and the Asia Pacific region. On the first round, for those that are not aware, 4 regional projects were approved, supporting 11 countries with funding from this fund. And this was a pilot round, as Kate mentioned, where lots of lessons learned were captured and then are helping us to move forward in a better way and more efficient with this upcoming round. But we have approved already 4 projects then, one on GHS implementation, another one on industrial chemicals management and IT tools to support chemicals and management, chemicals registration and risk assessments in the Latin American region, and then 2 regional projects as well in East and West Africa, dealing mainly with the substitution of highly hazardous pesticides, and projects dealing with agroecology and capacity building. So finally, what I would like to just remark here is that please make sure that you are familiar with the guidance, but also that we as the Secretariat are able to provide you with support as you are putting together your applications. Any questions that you may have, you can refer to the fund and submit to the GFC Secretariat email address. And we have a help desk, but we're also going to put forth publicly frequently asked questions, so that you can also look into that document to have some responses to any queries that you may have. And then we will have also the opportunity of having another webinar tomorrow in other languages, English and French and all the UN languages, so Russian, Arabic, and Chinese. And we think that these webinars, plus this availability of the Secretariat with this sort of help desk that we will establish from now until the end of the submission process, we will be able to provide the support to applicants so that you make outstanding and impactful and innovative project proposals. The GFC gives us a shared measurable roadmap now with these 5 strategic objectives and 28 targets, but now also we have a fund that will help you, all applicants, all countries, to catalyze the efforts for the achievement of these targets, to move faster to safer products, safer workplace, and healthier communities. So we look forward to working with you and to support you as you make your project proposals. I will now hand over to Dorothy, who is another colleague from the Secretariat, who will also brief you on how to ensure that your projects have multi-stakeholder and multi-sectoral approaches. Dorothy.
Can I have the... Okay, thank you, Eduardo. So now I'll take you through the next step in our presentation, which is on multi-stakeholder and multi-sectoral engagements. So yeah, as we've had from Kay and from Eduardo, the unique nature of the Global Framework on Chemicals, it's multi-stakeholder and multi-sectoral approach. And when reading through the framework or when listening through the presentations that we've had this morning, you can kind of pick out keywords that can point you towards the essence of the framework. Words like participation, collaboration, cooperation, coordination, partnership, etc. All these are showing up in the framework text, but also in the in different implementation mechanisms of the framework. And this is what we need to ensure that all the projects bring to the front. So when you think about the multi-stakeholder and multi-sector engagement, it's important to think of this three things. So first is the stakeholders that you will engage in the process of developing the project, but also in the implementation. So government ministries and agencies. And just to remind you that this is not an exhaustive list of the people that stakeholder that we can engage, but this is just an indication of the stakeholders and sectors that can be engaged. So you have government ministries and agencies, which are important in setting up policies, regulation, enforcement, and also intersector coordination. You have workers, employers, and consumer groups, NGOs, civil society groups, academia, professional bodies, and private sector. All these are different stakeholders that you can engage in the process of developing and implementing the project. But most importantly also is the different sectors that you can engage with. Health and labor, so occupational and public health agencies that will bring issues about exposure monitoring, public and worker protection, environment and agriculture, which looks at ecosystem, food safety, sustainable practices, trade, education, finance, and economic and industry sectors. So these are also some of the important sectors that you can bring into your project to make it more inclusive. But one other important thing is looking at the levels. So as we've had, you can look at the global regional level, which focuses on cross-country coordination, sharing best practices, but also at the national level, again, this is the government policy, regulation, interministerial coordination. At the subnational level, that's where the implementation of the project occurs. And then at the community and local levels, where you address real-life exposures, vulnerability, where you have direct engagement with workers, households, and local stakeholders. So it's important when you're thinking of who to involve to look at all these areas, the stakeholders, the sectors, but also looking at all the levels of implementation. So the different opportunities for engaging stakeholders in your project development, but also in the implementation. And it's important to look at stakeholder engagement throughout the process of developing the project up until the last stage of implementation. So it's important to involve stakeholders at the project design and inception. As we've had this round, we'll start with developing a concept note, and that's your inception process. So at that stage, it's important to identify key institutions or actors that you would like to engage across sectors, engaging stakeholders. When you're setting up, what are your priorities and which needs to align to the priorities of the fund, what success will look like. So that also needs to be discussed with the stakeholders. Clarify where mandates intersect, because then you might have a project that will go across health, labor, environment, and there's different mandates. So it's important to look at the entry points for each of the sectors and where your mandates are intersecting so that you can collaborate meaningfully. And this is important because when you engage at this level, you build trust, you have shared ownership of the project, but also you have the policy relevance from the outset. Because if you're an environment, sitting at environment and you're speaking about labor issues, it's important to speak to the labor people, because then they'll give you that what is relevant for the labor. And so it's the same case for health and other sectors as well. Then also during planning and structuring of the project, so when you're designing your objectives, activities, so your performance indicators to look at how successful your project is going to be, it's important to engage with the stakeholders. It's important to clarify the stakeholder roles in what they're going to do in terms of governance and the delivery of the project, and also oversight. So it's not just to involve them as a token, but to give them roles, and that needs to be showcased in your application. And what is important also is to establish or align with existing coordination mechanisms. So if you're developing a project, it may be useful to look at for example, at the country level, are there coordination mechanisms that are existing that you can capitalize on? The steering committee on chemical safety, for instance, are there technical working groups? Are there people already working in this area that you can engage with instead of inventing the wheel? Another important thing is also to allocate time, budget, and tools for meaningful participation. Because this is quite important, that the engaging of the stakeholders is very meaningful, so that you have budgeted for it in terms of time and resources for engaging the stakeholders, and that's very critical. And then when implementing and delivering the project, the relevant stakeholders should be engaged in executing this activities, not just advising. So if you have a project that touches on health, for instance, it's important to have, for example, Ministry of Health or public health officials, agencies involved in executing the activity, not just them providing advice or reviewing documents. Coordinating across sectors, training, inspections, service delivery, etc., but also leveraging on sector-specific systems. So when you're looking at health and labor, you have health services, labor inspection, there's data in health and labor. So there's already mechanisms that you may not be aware of in other sectors. So it's important to engage and leverage on those sector-specific mechanisms. And that's important because it makes that engagement practical, visible, and also embedded in the outcomes. And then lastly, is when implementing, monitoring, learning, and adapting. So engaging stakeholders throughout the process of tracking progress, identifying what are the challenges, and interpreting the results. But using this participatory tools, so joint reviews, stakeholder reflection sessions, community feedback, and those are very important because then it closes the loop and also strengthens accountability. So one might be asking, what is the value of engaging health and labor in this multi-sectoral chemical engagement? So this is just a summary of what the health and labor sectors bring to the table. First is legitimacy and trust, because the health and labor institutions connect directly with people. It connects with workers, patients, the public. So when you engage the health and labor, it strengthens your project's credibility, visibility, and also social endorsement, because health and labor has that social capital within the community. So that also will help to increase your visibility. The second thing is this cross-sector policy integration, because labor looks at the workplaces, health and safety, and also health addresses the exposure pathways. So naturally, they integrate chemical safety into national and workplace policies, which are critical in chemical safety management. Another issue is it makes the invisible visible. And in this case, we're talking about highlighting the vulnerable, neglected groups, the informal workers, for example, women in cleaning roles, smallholder farmers, etc. So engaging with the health and labor will help to bring the this vulnerable workers or communities into your project, and also ensures that the chemical risks are addressing the needs of the vulnerable population. Also, as I said before, the health and labor gives you access to existing structures. So occupational injury and disease registries, there's a lot of data, for example, absenteeism data, sick leave, compensation claims. So there's data that will help to monitor the progress of your intervention, for instance. So, and that will be very useful because you have, when you engage health and labor, then you have a whole set of information that you may not have if you do not involve them. And then last but not least, it's the health and labor mandates are rooted in human dignity, human rights, justice, and protection. So when you engage health and labor, you are strengthening the ethical and legal basis of chemical safety initiatives. And that's very critical because the GFC framework is also rooted in human rights. So what are the common pitfalls and how to avoid them when engaging different stakeholders? First, so you engage stakeholders after the proposal is drafted. In this case, for instance, engaging stakeholders after you've developed your concept note. So that's a common pitfall. So it's important to engage key stakeholders early in the process, in the project design. And what will be useful is to have the stakeholder analysis early in the process. Now you have from now until December, so you have plenty of time to see which are the stakeholders that you need to engage, and have that engagement quite early on to have buy-in from the beginning. Another common pitfall is to have many stakeholders listing many stakeholders in your project, but they're not meaningfully involved. So one of the key things, as we've had before, is that it's important that when you are listing your stakeholders, you have to define clear roles. Who is going to be leading, who will advise, who will implement, who will do monitoring. So it's important to have clear roles in your project description as much as possible so that the stakeholder engagement is not just a token, but it's a meaningful engagement. Again, as I said before, one of those pitfall is engagement is just symbolic. You're just consulting. You're giving people document to review. That is not meaningful engagement. So make sure you have steering groups, advisory panel, there's delivery mechanisms, because as we've seen, there are core benefits of engaging different stakeholders. And then focusing, for instance, on national level institutions. As we've seen, there is different levels from global to the community level. So involve subnational, local, frontline actors, occupational safety officers, your extension officers, cooperative health workers, etc. So it's important that you involve not just national level or regional level stakeholder, but also even at the local level stakeholders are engaged. And then another common pitfall is there's no ongoing engagement after the inception of the project. You've received the funding, then you stop engaging the stakeholders. But it's important that there are different touch points of reflection during the whole process, from the beginning to the end when you're closing the project. And then the last pitfall is engagement is under budgeted or rushed. As we can appreciate, stakeholder engagement needs resources. So it's important to allocate time, budget, coordination capacity for meaningful participation so that all stakeholders are meaningfully engaged. So lastly, I would like to have a short video from one of the previous participant of the last round who was successful, who will discuss a little bit on how they did stakeholder engagement and how they intend to do it moving forward as they are looking forward to implementing the project.
Thank you, Silvani Munganya. Thank you, representing 3 consortium organizations, Agenda for Environment and Responsible Development in Tanzania, Best Selection Nexus of Ethiopia, and SEJAD, which is Center for Environment and Justice Development in Kenya. Our project is titled is Building Capacity for Replacement of Highly Hazardous Pesticides with Agroecology Across Eastern Africa. We centered our capacity building HHPs because HHPs are among the hazardous or harmful pesticides, although they represent a small number of pesticides registered globally, which causing about 11,000 deaths annually, and about 385 million unintentional poisoning annually. And the situation is worsened in Africa, particularly with small-scale farmers in developing countries, particularly in Africa, including the 3 countries where we aim to implement the project: Tanzania, Kenya, and Ethiopia. And this multi-country project to be implemented in those countries with the aim of building capacity of smallholder farmers to replace those highly hazardous pesticides with agroecology. Yeah, we thought implementing as NGOs without involving other stakeholders, we couldn't achieve the planned outcome. So we thought it was necessary to involve other stakeholders, including the government, respective ministries and agencies, and also other stakeholders, even including media and researchers, labor. And we decided this from our previous experience in other projects. For example, under the Africa Stockpiles Program, ASP, which was implemented between 2008 and 2012, we also participated, the 3 NGOs participated in their countries, particularly Agenda and Ethiopia. And we involved other stakeholders, including the government ministries, labor, and Ministry of Environment, researchers, academia. This project was successful because of the involvement of these different stakeholders. Again, Agenda and the SEJAD in Kenya implemented a project under SICAM Quick Start Program between 2009 to 2012, also involving different stakeholders, the government ministries and agencies, research and academia, media, the private sector. And from these networks, our stakeholders, we formed a network of those stakeholders for sharing information, but also with a steering kind of committee involving those stakeholders, where we had frequent meetings to discuss the project, but also see and harness contribution of each stakeholder towards the success of the project. So we thought it was necessary to copy from the previous initiatives or those projects, the ESP and the Kickstart program, to also help in implementing this project. And within this project, we thought it was necessary to leverage on the previous network involving the stakeholders, and also come up together, particularly in the inception meeting, to identify roles and responsibility of stakeholders during the implementation of the project. So we'll involve them in different kind of responsibilities, but we'll start with during the inception workshops, where we'll invite those stakeholders and identify their roles in this project, aiming to have a successful project at the end. Considering labor, the role to play, Ministry of Agriculture, they are the one involved in registration and management of pesticides, and Ministry of Environment, because pesticides have effects on health and environment, not only environment, not only health. So we'll involve those stakeholders at the different levels. Yes, so we'll encourage them to consider multi-stakeholder involvement from the beginning, because each stakeholder has an important role to play in this kind of activities, in this kind of projects. For example, the smallholder farmers, they have their role to play at the ground. Other community members, extension staff, media, government agencies, NGO and researchers, they have their role to play. Also the private sector, as they're involved in maybe in securing and trading of pesticides, but also in other specific arrangement depending on the country. So we'll encourage them to involve different stakeholders from the grassroots to the national level.
Now I'll hand over to Jorge Okana from IOMC to speak about IOMC support opportunities. Jorge, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dorothy. And thank you for inviting me to be in this presentation and this webinar. It's a real honor to be with all of you and to represent the IOMC. Well, my name is Jorge Ocaña and representing the IOMC, but I'm working in UNITAR and the manager of Chemicals and Waste program. Well, let's start with the IOMC. Let me see if I know how this works. Please bear with me because I'm always not very good at these things. Okay, the IOMC and the GFC fund. So essentially we will go through probably just explaining a little bit what the IOMC, why the IOMC is there, what kind of activities we run, and then we will move slowly into how the IOMC have been supporting the GFC Secretariat in terms of starting the GFC, negotiating the GFC, and then moving into the fund slowly with a case study at the end. This is the mission of the IOMC. In order to save some time, I will let you to read it rather than myself reading it. And I guess that the slides will be shared with all of you, so then I will not go through it in detail. Okay, so the IOMC is about collaboration, working together, avoid duplication. So essentially, this is the key features of the IOMC. It's bringing together actually intergovernmental organizations. And these organizations are working on chemicals and waste management issues. So essentially, we exchange information, we collaborate, and we work together. The participating organizations, we have 10 organizations part of the IOMC, what we call the participating organization or POs. So essentially, you have FAO, ILO, UNDP, UNEP, UNIDO, UNITAR, WHO, the World Bank, OECD, and the BRS conventions. It was established in 1995 through a memorandum of understanding. And actually, in 1995 it started, but then it was following the recommendations from 1992 UN Conference of Environment and Development. It has grown. Actually, initially, the IOMC had 6 organizations, and now we are 10 organizations. So then we expected to grow a bit more, so let's see. What do we do? Well, we provide recommendations. Essentially, we identify gaps and overlaps in different activities by different organizations. So essentially, in these recommendations, we try to also develop some common policies. We develop guidance, and actually some POs are also doing some training activities in countries. And actually, there is also developing standards, more recommendations, open dialogues, etc. So this is the kind of activities we do, recommendations and more collaboration. Other activities, so particularly I'm going to give you an example of 3 activities that we are, at the moment, we have open groups on that. So one of them is mercury. There is an IOMC group on mercury. So essentially we discuss and coordinate activities on mercury related issues. There's also the GFC implementation programs, which I will explain a little bit more later. And there is also the group on financing. Essentially, we're talking about financing. How do we support countries, and how do we try to somehow link the different initiatives and financing for countries and actually for activities of the IOMC as well. We also have a strong component or a strong somehow mandate is information exchange. So essentially, we exchange information on joint planning. For example, if there is one participating organization working on JEF projects, another one working on JEF projects as well, and they're working in similar topics, we are trying to exchange this information and trying also to coordinate activities so to avoid duplications. IOMC and the participating organizations have been playing a key role on beginning of ICCM5 and after. I must say that probably before ICCM5. Essentially, the IOMC participating organizations have been working on the negotiations, what we call the Beyond 2020 negotiations or process. So in that sense, IOMC has been very active even before the GFC, and during SICAM also we were quite active as well. In terms of commitments, there are several governing bodies actually that are endorsing or have already endorsed the recognition of the GFC officially. What does it mean? That the GFC is part of the work program of these organizations. So then in that sense, we have internalized the GFC as our core activities. In terms of activities, we know that the POs have specific activities according to the mandates, but actually this is our strength because we collaborate. And actually, if you look at the IOMC, we have all the many different sectors. As Dorothy clearly mentioned, it's very important to have all the sectors collaborating and working together. So in that sense, the IOMC is quite efficient at that. We collaborate at somehow at the IOMC level, all the different sector activities for a common goal of the sound management of chemicals. In terms of meetings, we have contributed to the Bureau, also to the GFC Executive Board with some inputs. And actually, there is also the open-ended hard-doc group on measurability indicators where the IOMC is very active. In Berlin Forum, actually, this is also one of the forum or one of the somehow spaces where the IOMC has taken somehow one of the lead roles and have provided some support and actually have contributed with a multi-sectoral, multi-stakeholder approach to the Berlin Forum. In terms of the leading IPs, so we have accepted the invitation of the ICCM5, in particular Resolution 5.8, which I will come back later to that, to develop implementation programs. There's also, we have been providing some support, and we have also been organizing some significant activities to support the GFC since 2024, and particularly in support of the implementation programs. This is the resolution of 5.8. Talks about implementation arrangements. As you can see, bullet number 2, if you look at the bullet, which is in red, actually actively invites the IOMC, governments, and stakeholders to collaborate on and develop proposals for implementation programs. This is done within our mandates, terms of reference, work plans. And actually, part of these activities have been organizing global workshops, having also some webinars. And the main idea of the implementation program is to support the implementation of the GFC. That's the main goal. So essentially, IOMC is taking an active role on the implementation of the IOMC through the implementation programs. Actually, the implementation programs have not been adopted yet. So we expect that adoption should take place, hopefully, by the first international conference in 2026. And here are the areas of work that are considered in the implementation programs. Essentially, we have these main areas of work. The first one is developing integrated national chemicals and waste management systems and capacities at the national and regional levels. This is what we call implementation program number 1, or IP1. You know, in chemicals, we love acronyms, so then we call it IP1. Then we go into the second one, which is the integrating sound management of chemicals and waste in economic and industrial sectors along the value chains. And that's what we call implementation program 2, or IP2. And then the last one is integrating sound management of chemicals and waste in sustainable development decision-making processes as appropriate. This is what we call IP3. Regarding the issues of concern, we're also trying to address these issues of concern if we think this is appropriate. Regarding these implementation programs, we have already organized webinars. We have organized also workshops on those ones, except for IP3, which probably we're planning to develop some activities from here until the end of 2025. Here's an example of collaboration of the IOMC. So essentially, the IOMC toolbox, this is a EU-funded project. And essentially, it gathers a number of participating organizations of the IOMC. What the toolbox is, essentially, the toolbox offers one-stop shop for all the materials, guidelines, resources. They make them available for countries. And actually, these resources are coming from the different participating organizations. And they are organized in 8 management schemes. Some of them are pollutant release and transfer registers. The other one is addressing classification of chemicals. We also have best available techniques. We also have occupational safety, management of pesticides, public health, consumer and industrial chemicals, management, accident prevention, management, etc. And we also have 6 online toolkits in addition to the 8 management schemes. In that sense, what we do is working together, developing this website, which you can see here on the screen, but at the same time also providing some support, technical support through these management schemes. We organize webinars, we organize also workshops in relation to this project. The idea is also that the toolbox is used for the implementation of the GFC as well. Okay, here's what kind of support the IOMC provides to the GFC fund. As I said before, there's 10 international organizations being part of the IOMC. Actually, we provide a specific expertise and knowledge on different aspects of chemicals and waste management. And actually, we can also provide support to applicants with technical advice, provision of technical guidelines and materials, and implementation actions during the applications process and during the implementation phase as well. If you would like to have more information, please contact any of the participating organizations of the IOMC, or you can contact also the email that is shown here on the screen, which is the Secretariat of the IOMC. Okay, here's a case study how we have supported one application on the GFC fund. So essentially, this is related to the GSC in Central America, but actually that was, I think, mentioned by Eduardo. In this particular proposal, UNITAR provided some technical advice to the countries working on this project. And then actually, that was done upon the request of the region. So essentially, the countries come and they request support. And actually, this is more or less how it works. So the countries come and they said, UNITAR, IOMC organization, whoever it is, please help me to develop this proposal. I need some technical support, technical advice. I would like to develop a proposal on that. And that's when our colleagues will start working with the countries. This is all we have to say at the moment on this particular case study. The implementation have not started yet, but we suspected that UNITAR is also taking part of the implementation, particularly on the training side, which is the mandate of UNITAR. Okay, here's something very nice to end up the presentation. Actually, our vision is to shape a sustainable future through coordinated global action to achieve the sound life cycle management of chemicals and waste for healthy lives and the environment. Thank you. Now I would like to please invite Rebecca to continue with the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jorge. So as you can see, we're moving to the very last part of this presentation before you have the opportunity to ask us any questions. I've already seen that there are a couple of people asking questions already, so feel free to drop any questions you have into the Q&A box. But I hope that in this part of the presentation, you will gain a deeper insight into the actual application forms. And I've also put in some frequently asked questions, so hopefully we can cover some of the questions you may already have. Before I go into the details, I just wanted to reiterate what was already posted in the chat. So there is a guidance document on the scope, which covers the topics that Eduardo spoke about before. It's available in 3 languages. We also have a very comprehensive application guideline, which goes line by line through the application forms and covers a lot of the very detailed information. We didn't put all of this into this presentation because otherwise we could spend a whole day on these things, but we're very confident that you can find a lot of the explanations in there and that this also covers the information you need to know. And of course, the application forms are available on the website, as well as further details on the application process. As you know, this webinar is being recorded, and we will also upload the presentation slides, so you can go back to it and follow up on things that you might want to know a month or 2 from today. We also have an FAQ document, which we are updating at the moment, and we will incorporate any questions from today into it, which will hopefully also cover any additional questions you have. I will go into the forms in a minute, but I just wanted to go back to this slide. As already mentioned by Eduardo, the application process now has 2 stages. The first stage will go from today to the 15th of December, where applicants are asked to submit a concept note, and then these will be screened and appraised by the board, and all successful concept notes will be asked to submit a full application package in the second stage. We'll be jumping a bit between stage 1 and stage 2. You'll see that all the stage 1 information is in blue and the stage 2 is in orange. But there are some things that you need to consider in stage 1 already that will relate to stage 2, just because, of course, the concept note is a starting point and the application will then build on this. What this means is that basically in stage 1, we have a very slim application form. It's just the concept note that applicants will submit with the signature of the lead applicant as well as a designated focal point. And then, as I said, shortlisted concept notes will be asked to submit the full application package in the second quarter of next year. And you can see on the right-hand side of this slide that the full application package then incorporates additional documents. So the concept note will be replaced by an application form, which again needs to be signed by the applicants and the official GFC focal point, but parts of the application form build on the concept note already, so you'll be updating information that you already provided. In addition, in the second stage, you'll be asked to submit a log frame as well as a budget, as well as supporting documents such as letters of support by participating organizations, co-financing confirmation, and depending on the exact nature of your project, other supporting documents may be required. This is also in the guidelines, so you can have a look at it there. What's really important is that we've updated all of the forms. For stage 1, as I mentioned, you need to look at the concept note, which is on the website. Please do not use any application forms from the previous rounds. Yeah, we've updated everything, so use the current concept note, please. There's one important change as well, which is related to the role of the national focal point. At the concept note stage, any designated focal point can endorse the application. We have situations where countries have more than one government representative nominated as a focal point. So we may have one from the Ministry of Environment, another one from the Ministry of Health, etc., etc. For the concept note, any of these focal points can sign the concept note form before submitting the application to us. Then moving to the application stage a bit later, we will require the national focal point, the official focal point, to endorse the application. Of course, we're trying to, there's a whole other process, which Kay Williams mentioned before, working on focal points at the moment. We do understand that there are situations where focal points may be difficult to reach, or you're having difficulties to engage with focal points. In those cases, please reach out to the Secretariat and we will advise you on what to do. Furthermore, a very common question we get on the submission of applications is whether a country can submit more than one application. So the general advice we provide is that in principle, yes, it's possible. You can submit multiple applications, but bear in mind that these applications are considered separately by the board, and that means that ultimately multiple applications are more or less competing for funding. So to reiterate what Dorothy said already, it's a better approach to develop a project proposal strategically, to coordinate among stakeholders within the development process, and to come up with a strong proposal together rather than submitting a very high amount of applications. In this case, I would say a higher quality goes over quantity of submissions. I'll now move to the different sections of the application form. So both the concept note as well as the application form are structured in 3 sections. I won't go question by question, but I'll cover some of the common areas for you to consider. As I said before, you can go back to the guidelines and you'll find more detailed information. So Section A is basically a project summary, which is the place where high-level information about the applicant goes, also an overview of the requested financing and the general alignment of the project with the Global Framework on Chemicals. One of the things you'll be requested to provide in this section is the indicative co-financing. We understand that co-financing is something that we're asked for a lot to explain. So basically, co-financing covers any monetary and non-monetary contributions that are not from the funding you requested from the GFC fund, but that comes from the projects or any project partners. As said before, each project should achieve at least 25% co-financing. And this can include in-kind contributions, which are things like providing office space, providing equipment, providing staff time, or similar contributions. At the concept note stage, you'll only be asked for an indicative amount, but bear in mind that in stage 2, you will be asked to provide detailed information in the budget application form about the available co-finance, and you'll also need to provide letters confirming this co-finance. And if your project gets approved, you'll also be asked to report on the co-finance contributions towards the project. The budget form, which you will only need in stage 2, is already available for you to have a look at, and you can see that there's a 3rd tab on that in that form where you're basically asked to provide information about the co-financing. With that, I'll move to section B, which is the project design, which is basically the core and heart of your project. This is where you put your project into context, you give basic descriptions, but you also describe the actual steps that your project will take and the expected sustainability and impact. We are applying a results-based management approach, which basically works a bit like a pyramid. So on the right-hand side, you can see that what we look at first is the outcome, the high-level goal of your project. You're really looking at what do you want to achieve, what should change, possibly beyond the actual lifetime of your project. So what are you heading for? This is then basically broken down into smaller packages called outputs, which are direct results of what will be produced, what will be delivered. These can then again be broken down into activities, which are actual tasks and actions. If you're not familiar with this concept, there are a lot of guidelines online, and I would just recommend for you to have a look at those available resources, which we already have. How is this reflected in the application forms? So in stage 1, you'll only be asked to design or give information about the project design at the output level. So we're not looking at the activities yet, but we're looking at kind of the big chunks of your work your project is looking at. And there's also a section related to the outcome and the actual goal your project is going for. This will become more detailed in stage 2, where, as you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, we will be asking you for the separate activities and the budget requested per activity, how this relates to the outputs and then to the ultimate outcome. So while you're designing your project, bear in mind that while you might not put all of this into the concept note, you will need to do this conceptualization and put it into the application form. In stage 2, you'll also be required to develop a logical framework, which next to the activities, outputs, and outcome will also include indicators and means of verification, which explain how you will measure progress towards the goals of your project. You'll also have to explain what the starting point is and where you're going and how you will measure that. The template is already available online, so you can already have a look at this as well. Another important aspect to consider is that for stage 1, you'll only be asked for the total requested budget as well as the budget per output. And then for stage 2, for all the shortlisted candidates, you will be required to develop a full project budget. If it helps you, the budget document is also available online already. And in this budget document, you will need to structure the budget by the activities and by different commitment classes over the years of your project. We commonly use 5 different commitment classes, as you can see here. And these are also available in the guidelines with the explanations provided here, which you can have a look at. The board has agreed on maximum percentages to indicate for you how to best structure your project. For the commitment classes, staff and personnel, as well as contractual services, which are any services of commercial nature which you use within your project, as well as transferring grants to implementing partners. Those together can make the total budget of your project. If you plan on using any equipment, vehicles, things like that, commonly in projects we have smaller IT equipment, which is something which some projects request, then bear in mind that the maximum amount you can use is 10%. And for travel, which are tickets and anything associated with that, the maximum percentage is 15%. With that, I'd also like to reiterate another aspect that was already mentioned before on sustainability. This is also part of the questions in section B and was already mentioned by Eduardo. So the fund aims to support projects that have results that go beyond the actual financing of the fund. So when you develop your project, already think about this aspect. Is your project replicable? Can it be upscaled? How can you connect your project with national priorities? Is there any regional impact? How can you make the results available? Is there a possibility to implement a financing mechanism? And ask yourself all these questions during the project design. Finally, I'll move to the third section, which is section C of the application form. This is basically providing any details about the implementation of the project. One of the things that's very important here is that the fund is open to multi-country or regional project. When designing the project, what's important here is that you will need to identify a lead applicant when kind of putting together a multi-country or regional project. This lead applicant will be the person who signs the legal agreement with UNEP. This will be the person who manages the project and reports back to us, and the person who will channel funds to any co-applicants or project partners. So when designing the project, please consider where the capacity is and who is best placed to take up this role. Finally, this section will also cover questions related to gender and safeguards. This was part of Dorothy's presentation already of making visible the invisible. It's not only about gender and women, but also informal groups, considering how do different groups in our societies participate, how are they represented, how can we collect data in a way that we disaggregate it by certain information, and how can we use a gender-sensitive approach to our project. When you design your project, the easiest way to do this is basically doing a stakeholder analysis at the beginning and really looking at who's involved, who's doing what, when, who has access, who makes decisions, who might gain, who might lose, and taking those things into account when designing your project. With that, I would like to end this presentation. As mentioned before, you can submit your concept notes by the 15th of December to the email address which is on the screen. You can visit the website for any further information about the fund. And we have another session coming up tomorrow afternoon, or afternoon Geneva time, which will also be in Spanish and French. So please join us for that if you would like to receive further information. And with that, we'll open it for questions and answers.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Indeed, let's move now to the Q&A part of this event. Thank you very much to the full team of the Secretariat for this excellent presentation. We have already received various questions in the chat and in the Slido. I would like to start by answering a question which is about where can we find the documents and the recording of this webinar. So various links have been shared in the chat, and we will again, before this event ends, reshare the links where you can find all the documents. We now move to a few very specific questions that have indeed already been addressed in your presentations. I think it's important to highlight again what the answers to these questions are. So I will list these questions and I will group some of them, let you reply, and then we go to another round of questions. We have Vanya Zunzilder, who has asked if universities, researchers, and professors can apply. We had also received questions on if certain regions can apply, and I think it has also been clearly presented in your presentations who can apply, but I think it's good to come back on that. We have also received a question from Sue mentioning that there is an emphasis prioritization of projects that can benefit other regions, or where knowledge can be transferred. How will or how does the GFC take key learning outcomes for such key projects to transfer or benefit other countries and regions? And Chinke Pelinogale, who is the regional coordinator for Southeast and East Asia for IPEN, is mentioning that in the first round of calls for the fund, they wanted to submit a proposal, but they did not receive support from the GFC focal point. Their proposal included biomonitoring, so they were asked to seek support from the Ministry of Health. However, the Ministry of Health was not the GFC focal point, so at the end, they did not get endorsement and were not able to submit the proposal. So that's a concrete example. And then there is also a more policy-oriented question from Suzanne Wilburn. She wanted to know what was learned from the sessions on the fund that were held in Uruguay during the Open and Working Group that have been affected the revision of this of the second round of the fund to make the fund available to health and labor sectors and for civil society participation. I think we can start with those. I hope you have taken good notes. And I'm looking at the team. Please open your mic and just go ahead. Thank you.
Well, thank you again for all those questions and for grouping the questions to you, Diana. Very interesting questions, and we'd like to take the opportunity to answer as much as possible questions. But again, I want to reiterate that there will be a help desk set up at our secretariat, and you are encouraged to reach out to us for any further clarifications that you may have after this webinar. In terms of eligibility and of academia, researchers, and regions, I want to reiterate that the fund main recipients, as stated in the terms of reference agreed by the GFC stakeholders at the at ICCM5 right now, state that governments from developing countries and countries with economies in transitions are the main recipients of the fund. However, civil society networks are also eligible to apply on an exceptional basis. And that shouldn't discourage any stakeholder from that group, civil society, to apply, because as a matter of fact, from the 4 projects that were approved under the first round, 2 of them were submitted by civil society networks. So it will depend on the rationale of your project and on the robustness of your project application. In that sense, academia is eligible to apply. However, I would like to point out also on the slide where I mentioned those projects that are not going to be prioritized, though they might be eligible, projects that are exclusively conceived to make research and to have studies as outputs may not be prioritized by the board as included in the guidelines. And the reason is that we're looking into supporting implementation. So if there are projects that are submitted by research or academia, if they do not have a clear path on implementation, and that could include how this will be scaled up or take over by a government institution to actually implement, then it is very likely that that project will not be prioritized. And in terms of regions, when I said developing countries, that includes, of course, all the UN regions. So all UN regions are encouraged to apply. And the board also does look into regional balance when selecting projects for funding. In terms of how projects could benefit other regions, there's some lessons learned from the first round. And there are many ways that you can demonstrate that you are going to benefit other countries besides the project, the countries that are included in a specific project proposal. And for as an example, I can give you from the approved projects from the first round. There is one of the projects that is dealing with IT tools for industrial chemicals management, for the creation of establishment of inventories and risk assessments databases. And they are going to, after the project finalizes, they are going to make available that master system in an open source code, so that any other countries in not only in the Latin American region, but also in the world could benefit at least to have the basic models on an open source code that then can be adapted according to national context of other beneficiaries. Or, for instance, if your project is developing guidelines or trainings, those trainings, they could be made available publicly and free of charge available to other countries, for instance. Or you can also demonstrate how you are going to invite for trainings or capacity building activities other countries that might be interested on also following those courses, not necessarily funding those participants, but that the invitation would be open. So that are examples of ways that you could demonstrate how you are benefiting other countries beyond the specific project that you are dealing with. And the reason is that this is prioritized because, again, we're speaking about limited funding, and the board is looking into financing those projects that could have the larger impact possible. So if that falls into the prioritization that the board has to do, because as you might understand, there are global interest and global demand for the fund, and this funding decision needs to be taken with the most impactful projects so that the use of the resources is the most efficient possible. In terms of the specific question about IPEM Pacific on not having the support from the national focal point, so this is something that we've tried to address with this new round of application, and that's why, as Rebecca very clearly explained, at the concept note submission, there's just a requirement of having any designated government focal point for endorsing the application. And that will guarantee that then if that concept note is successful in the shortlisting, that then will be invited to submit a full application form. If any organization is struggling to have the endorsement of the official national designated GFC focal point, then you can reach the Secretariat, and we will try our best to support that through the Secretariat or through the Executive Board and the regional representative that are sitting in the board on behalf of beneficiary countries. So we think that with this approach, we will address that, which is a concern that was communicated also at OEWG, and that allows me to go into the last question. We had very rich discussions at OEWG in Uruguay, where we had the opportunity to hear from both applicants or potential applicants on the fund, how the decisions are made, and on the terms of reference. Those comments, those stakeholders were invited also to submit written comments, and those comments have been collected, have been processed, and now have been made available to the Executive Board. However, not all of the comments can be could have be addressed at this second round, because some of those comments or feedback that was received was dealing also on the terms of reference themselves. And we, the Executive Board, or we as Secretariat, have not any ability to review the terms of reference. The terms of reference are to be adopted by the next conference, so it will be in November 2026. And the board will be working on that revision of the TORs early next year with the comments that have been heard in OEWG, so that the first international conference can make a decision whether they would like to adjust some of the terms and conditions that are included in the TORs. However, we try as much as possible to address those concerns that were raised at OEWG that could be worked out through the guidance without adjusting the terms of reference. And one of those is how we are now encouraging actually applications that are coming from other sectors more strongly and more clearly. In the first round, they were invited, but in this round, we're making an emphasis that we're looking at, the board is looking at applications that demonstrate multi-stakeholder nature and that involve other sectors. And that's why also this adjustment as well on the endorsement of the project application at the concept note level has been considered, which we hope will simplify and will make sure that these submissions from other sectors different from environment could also be submitted and considered in this phase. I think with that, I hand over back to you, Diana.
Yes, and indeed, I don't have directly access with the Slido because there is a technical problem here, but I should have started with a series of questions that were posted by Rory O'Neill, who has been very vocal online. He insists on the fact that he wants to know if the GFC Secretariat, the GFC Fund, will remove the role of government focal points as gatekeepers on civil society applications. He mentions that governments may prioritize their own bids over stronger civil society bids, or on some occasions be hostile to civil society organizations. He also states that the GFC Fund has no expertise on labor issues, little representation on health, and no civil society representation. It reflects that it's not a multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholder system. So will the fund's executive board and mechanisms be revised to properly represent all stakeholders? He of course makes reference to the SICAM process. He also would like to know if the GFC Secretariat, GFC Fund will revise the rules to remove the exceptional circumstances condition on non-government bids. He mentions that project bids prepared by labor unions in round 1 were blocked by government focal points before they were even seen by the GFC Fund. And other unions knew this was insurmountable barrier, so did not submit projects. So how will the GFC Secretariat address it? Rory has been making a lot of comments online, so that's why I insist on that. And he is clearly asking how can labor focal points sign off projects? Well, I'll let you go back.
Thank you very much. I just will take some of the first comments. Thank you very much, Rory, for your comments. I think some of the things that you're raising are embedded in the terms of reference. And I think, as Eduardo said, the terms of reference are for negotiation review at the first international conference in November 2026. I strongly suggest that you put forward these comments. The executive board will be putting forward a proposal and recommendation with regard to those terms of reference, and that's the point to which to influence that discussion regarding the composition of the executive board and some of the processes, should you not be happy or you feel that that is holding back some of the potential applications on the ground. Having said that, I think the new approach with a concept note does allow 4 focal points in any area to put forward a concept note. So at least the board is seeing these ideas, proposals, and projects, and being able to, so that sort of initial block should not be happening as long as you have engagement with a focal point in a government ministry. Or even at the concept stage, I think you could just put it in yourself. So that is an improvement. I know you have a lot of comments. We will take away those comments and provide you with more detailed suggestions, proposals of what we could do to make sure that the Labour voice is fully heard. But I'll pass over to colleagues if they want to expand. No? Do you want?
Yeah, just to add on the health and labor focal points, we are currently working with WHO and ILO to increase representation of health and labor focal point in the GFC. So moving forward, we will have health and labor focal points that will be able to sign off at least from the on the concept note stage, but then we'll also have more health and labor national focal points moving forward. So that should be sorted out. Thank you.
Okay, we can continue with other questions. Online participants are asking, will implementation projects such as on-the-ground efforts to clean up chemically contaminated areas be considered? Does the fund support urgent needs, for example, funding for an environmental hotspot remediation before the evaluation process is completed? Somebody is also asking if the documents of the first round of projects are available or accessible to get some inspiration from there. Another question is about civil society networks. Do they need to be based in the respective target countries? And also, what are the criteria to create an exceptional basis for NGOs networks? This is unclear, as this first round was for civil society actors. That's what I have. I think we can go with those questions before we handle the next ones.
Yes, as mentioned in projects that might not be prioritized, projects that are exclusively or in a majority spending the budget in infrastructure or purchase of equipment are not going to be prioritized as per a decision of the executive board. And this is because this is a fund that is mainly to support institutional national capacities. And I would think that cleanup or hotspot remediation projects might fall in this large purchase of equipment. So if that's the case, then they might not be eligible, as long as you could have a project proposal that with some seed funds, you are unlocking other additional funding to do this cleanup or remediation hotspot. So it would depend on that, but as you have heard from the previous presentation on the details of the application, the budget cannot exceed 10% on the purchase of the equipment. So you would need to carefully consider that as you conceive the project. And then in terms of if the civil society organizations need to be based in country, that all depends on how the project proposal is conceived. We do have projects where the that organization, that is lead organization, is not necessarily based in countries, but do have some alliances with local partners that will be doing the hands-on and daily implementation of the projects. So if there is a strong justification on how this particular civil society, even though it's not based in country, will have the capacity, but also demonstrate that why is it the best place organization to implement that project, then that should be explained in the application, and then the board will make ultimately the decision. So they are not excluded per se, but there should be a justification if this is not in country. And also, just to understand what the reason is we are trying to build capacities in countries, and that therefore, of course, we would think first that to build capacities in countries, there should be an organization in country, and that will support that. But if there is a strong justification or strong argument for another type of approach, that should be just reflected in the project proposal. And when it comes the time for appraisal by the board, this will be considered. And then the criteria of exceptionality for civil society organizations, again, is something that was decided by the countries and stakeholders when they adopted the terms of reference of the fund. So it's something that cannot be addressed at this point. It's something that if would change, wouldn't have to be at the first international conference, but we've heard already those comments, and the board is aware of those comments. So this is something that will be assessed moving forward. But the exceptionality shouldn't disencourage civil society organizations to participate in the funding round and to submit applications. I gave the example of the previous round where we had half of the projects approved submitted by civil society organizations, and this is the spirit of the framework. This is a framework that is multi-stakeholder, so with the executive board is looking into that aspect when also assessing project applications. So please feel free to apply. And in terms of previous documents, the executive board reports are posted on the website. We cannot share, because that's intellectual property of the applicants, project proposals from previous rounds. But you have, yes, indeed, information on the approved projects. So that could serve as an inspiration as well from other funding mechanisms, such as a special program or the Minamata SIP. There are successful applications as well as part of their monitoring and evaluation reports that you could read that could serve as an inspiration. And again, reiterate, we are also in the Secretariat open to receive any queries as you put forward your application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eduardo. There were a lot of questions on NGOs' participation and eligibility, and there are a few suggestions here and questions that can bring new aspects. Since focal point endorsement is required for NGOs to apply, will the focal points be contacted in advance to be briefed on the importance of NGOs' participation and to ensure a smooth process? Another question, as focal point is supposed to approve participation or recognition of an NGO for applying, what about if a government is also applying? And there surely being the issue of competition with the NGO application. And then where approved fund will be allocated at implemented entities or directly sent to the government partners? This is another concrete question. If an NGO in a member country received the funding in the first round, can the government apply for the second round? Another concrete question. Maybe we can go with those.
Thank you. Those are all very important questions. So for the first one regarding focal points, as mentioned earlier, there's a separate process right now on capacity building and focal points specifically, but it is on our list of things to do in the next months to send out an email to all focal points to brief them on the fund and prepare them for the requests that they may be receiving. Regarding the NGO versus government applications from the same country, as mentioned before, the ideal situation would be to look at the project proposals and possibly come up with an approach where you coordinate beforehand. So of course, you're allowed to submit as many applications as you would like to. However, be strategic about it. And in such a big project, you can decide that certain outputs will be implemented by different project partners. So possibly you could come up with a project where part is implemented by civil society, part is implemented by the government, and you come up with a truly multi-stakeholder project. That is all I would say about this question. Regarding where the funds will go, this relates to that. As I mentioned in one of my slides, you will need to identify a lead applicant who is the main point in contact with us. And this is the person we sign an agreement with where the funds go. And this lead applicant will then be responsible for reporting to us, but also for transferring the funds to different other project partners. So it's also very important when you set up your project to identify this lead applicant. And finally, can the same country apply in round 2? Yes, it's open to everyone. There's no exclusion, but of course, the board does take a look at the regional and the country balance. And I would say that that makes it even more relevant for countries who've already received funding from the first round to underline why they're applying again, what their current application is about, because of course, as I said, the board will look at all of the applications and consider this regional balance.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. And before we move to the closing, there's a last question from a focal point who would like to know, get more clarification about the co-financing. How many co-financing letters would you need to approve the project?
Well, it's not about the amount of letters, but as mentioned before, there's a 25% co-financing requirement. And it's up to you as a project to decide how you split that co-finance. It can come from one of the project partners alone, but you can of course split it up between different project partners as well. That is a decision depending on the project design. So you will just need to confirm all the co-financing that you've put forward in your application. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. I think it's now time to move to the closing, but you have heard there will be a second webinar and we will be relaunching resharing the link of that webinar in the chat soon. But as we are closing, I would like to give back the floor to Kay and bring a question that Rory has also brought in the chat. And maybe that can be used as basis for your closing. Can we assume that the comments made in this webinar are included in the fund's deliberations? And with that, I hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Diana, and thank you very much for your engagement and your questions. As you can see, I think we are making great strides to improve the way that we handle the fund. We know that there's a lot of interest, and I think we can really benefit from the multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral approach. So we have had a spotlight on health and labour engagement. We've had a spotlight on how participating organisations of the IOMC can help. We're offering guidance through a help desk, and we've got frequently asked questions. There's always room for improvement, but I think those of you that engaged in the first round can see that this is a step change in the way that we're moving forward. So I think we will take away the questions. We will also have a Bureau meeting towards the end of October, and we will be sharing with the Bureau members some of the highlights of this particular webinar and some of the queries and concerns that have been raised in those questions. So with that, I wish you luck. I think this is a really important fund. We're very willing to support the Executive Board in getting the money out of the door, and I'm sure that we shall receive some excellent high quality projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kay. And as we are now really closing, I would also like to add that there might be a couple of questions that remain unanswered, but I'm sure that in the webinar that the colleagues are hosting tomorrow afternoon, they will also make sure that these points are correctly addressed. And without, thank you very much to everybody. Applause to all the panelists. I think the very clear presentations here, and looking forward to see you soon online or in person.